Chapter 1. The Door and the Fire. Come in, out of the rain. Here, give me that coat. The hook by the door has held 1,000 wet coats in its time, and it will not mind one more. There we are. Mind the step now, and come through to the fire. The chair on the left is yours. It is the better chair, whatever the cat may have told you. She holds strong opinions about the one on the right, and I have long since stopped arguing with her, because she is asleep for 20 hours of every day, and arguments require attendance. Sit. Let the fire have a look at you. That's it. That is the whole of your work for tonight, and I am pleased to say you have done it well. The cattle is only just coming to itself, so there is time yet. There is always time here. That is rather the point of the place. People arrive at my door with the road still hurrying in their legs, and it takes an hour or so by this fire for the hurrying to drain out of them, down through the floorboards, where the house does something useful with it, I'm sure. Warms the cellar, perhaps. I've put you in room 1 tonight. The key is the brass one, there on the second hook. You can see it catching the firelight, but there is no hurry at all to go up. The fire has a good hour left in it, and the rain, by the sound of things, has taken a room of its own and means to stay the night. Listen to it a moment. There, that is good rain. Not the sharp kind that rattles and means to be let in, but the long, soft, patient kind, the kind that has nowhere better to be. It smooths the night down the window panes. It makes the lamplight look warmer than it is. Some rain falls and some rain settles in, and this is the settling kind. Room 1 is a good room. I would say I have no favorites, and I would be lying, and you would know it. So I will simply say it is the room I give to people who look as though they have been carrying something a long way. The bed is soft in the middle and firm at the edges, which is the correct arrangement. The window looks out over the yard and the dark fields beyond it, and the rain on that particular window makes a sound I have never heard anywhere else. Rounder somehow. You will hear it soon enough, and whenever I take that brass key down from its hook, I find I am thinking of the mapmaker. Elias Wren, his name was. He stayed 11 nights in room 1, years ago now, and he arrived on an evening very much like this one. The same soft rain, the same fire. Very likely the same cat in the same chair, holding the same opinions. The knock, when it came, was a polite one. 2 soft raps, and then a pause. Not the pause of a man wondering if anyone was home. The pause of a man perfectly prepared to wait and to be pleasant about it. You can tell a great deal about a person from the way they wait. And I had learned a great deal about Elias Wren before I ever opened the door. He was tall and thin and getting on in years the way a good ladder gets on in years, a little grey and entirely reliable. The rain had found every part of him. His hat had surrendered. His coat had given the rain right of way. His boots had accepted their situation with dignity, and under his arm, wrapped in oilcloth and held close the way you would hold a sleeping child, was a long leather tube, and that tube was as dry as a sermon. That told me most of what I needed to know about the man before he said a single word. A person who lets himself get soaked to the bone while keeping his work perfectly dry is a person with his priorities in good working order. "Good evening," he said. "I wonder if you have a room and a table, and no particular need of either in a hurry." I told him we had all 3, and that the third one was our specialty. He ate by the fire that first night. Leek and potato soup and bread from that morning's baking, with butter enough to be sincere about it. He ate slowly and completely, the way tired men eat when they are finally warm, giving each spoonful his full attention, as though the soup had earned it, which it had. I make a good soup, and while he ate he looked at the room, not the nosy kind of looking, the measuring kind. His eyes went along the beams and down the stair and across the flagstones, and I could all but see the little numbers forming behind them, so many paces wide, So many high, the hearth set just so from the centre. He caught me noticing, and he smiled into his soup. "Have it," he said. "I make maps. After enough years of it, everything looks like something that wants measuring." "And does it ever stop?" I asked him. "At night," he said, "if the rain is good." The rain was good that night, traveller. It is good tonight too. And when his bowl was empty and his coat was steaming gently on the hook, he asked me the question that began the whole affair, which was whether the long table by the window might be free after breakfast. Because he had something that needed unrolling, and it needed the length of a coastline to do it. But that is the next part of the story, and the kettle has just found its voice, so let me pour you something warm first. There is no hurry at all. Chapter 2. The Map on the Long Table. The long table has stood by that window for longer than I have stood behind this bar. It has held harvest suppers and mending baskets and one memorable christening cake, but I do not believe it has ever held anything as carefully as it held the map of Elias Wren. He came down early the next morning, before the light had properly committed to the day, and he wiped the table twice with a cloth, though I had wiped it once already. I took no offence. Some work asks for a clean surface twice over, and a man is entitled to be certain. Then he opened the leather tube. There is a sound a great sheet of good paper makes when it is unrolled by someone who knows how. A soft, slow breathing sound, like a sail settling, like a sleeper turning over. The map went down the table the way dawn goes down a valley, and he weighted its corners with what the room could offer: the salt cellar, the inkwell, a smooth grey stone off the mantel, and his own pocket watch, which lay there quietly ticking on the corner of the sea. I have seen a fair number of maps. Maps of farms, maps of parishes, one very confident map of the whole world that got the whole world slightly wrong. I had not seen anything like this. 9 years of coastline came down that paper like one long, unhurried thought. The land was the colour of weak tea, and the sea was left pale, and between them ran the shore in fine brown ink. Every headland, every notch and nick and elbow of it, drawn with a line so steady you would think the coast had held still on purpose. The hills were done in small, combed strokes, thousands of them, laid close together the way wind lays the grass, so that you could very nearly feel the shape of the country under your hand without touching the paper at all. Little soundings walked out into the pale of the sea in his small, patient numbers, 3 fathoms, 5, 7, like footprints going for a swim. And the names. He had lettered every cove and lane and landing in a hand so small and even that reading it felt like being told a secret in a calm voice. Gull Ledge, the Brothers, Halfpenny Stair, names the fisherman had given him, he said, one at a time, over 9 years of doorsteps and harbour walls and cups of tea he had not asked for but had learned to accept, because the tea and the names came together, or not at all. 9 years. He had walked the whole of that coast at 3 miles an hour with a pencil in his hand, and here it was on one table in one morning light with the steam from his cup drifting across it like weather. But I have not told you the best part, which is the gap. Down in the lower corner, where the coast made its final run in towards Saltmere and the river's mouth, there was a stretch of nothing, 7 miles of clean, blank paper between the point and the village. No ink, no names, no combed little hills. The line of the shore simply stopped, the way a sentence stops when the speaker means to finish it later, and the emptiness sat there inside all that patient work, like the one unlit window in a town at night. "You have missed a bit," I said, because someone had to, and the cat was asleep. He laughed at that. A quiet laugh, the kind that has been kept in a drawer and looked after. "Saved," he said, "not missed. I have been drawing this coast for 9 years, and a man learns to save the best walking for last. 7 miles, all of it downhill by lunchtime, ending at a harbour with lumps in the windows. Tomorrow I walk it, and the day after I draw it, and then it is done. He touched the blank corner very lightly as he said it, the way you touch a page you have not read yet. And what does a mapmaker do when his map is done? I asked. He considered that with the seriousness it deserved, looking out the window at the rain, which was thinking about becoming drizzle. Sleeps, he said, I expect. He spent the rest of that day at the long table doing small, sound-making nuttings, sharpening pencils with a little knife in long, peaceful strokes, 7 strokes to a side, touching up the combed strokes of a hill here and there, writing 3 letters and addressing them slowly. The fire kept its counsel. The rain thinned as promised, and every so often he would stand back from the table with his cup and simply look at the whole of it, the whole 9 years, the way a farmer looks at a field that is nearly in. One thing at a time, he said to me once, and each thing done well, and the miles look after themselves. That is the sort of sentence that stays in a house, traveller. I have swept it into corners for years and never quite gotten it out the door. Chapter 3, Rue 1. He went up early that second night, meaning to be gone before full light, and I went ahead of him with the candle, because the 3rd stair creaks and it is only fair to introduce guests to it properly. Room 1 is at the end of the short landing, and the door opens with a small, agreeable complaint, like an old dog asked to shift over, willing, but wanting it noted. Inside, the ceiling comes down low and friendly, ribbed with dark beams that have held the roof up without comment for 200 years. The walls are whitewashed thick as frosting, and everything smells faintly of lavender and candle smoke and clean, cold linen. The bed sits with its head to the inner wall, away from the window's draught, which is where a bed ought to sit. On it that night, as on this one, was the quilt my grandmother made, in the pattern they call flying geese, small blue triangles on cream, whole flocks of them, all migrating quietly in the direction of the pillow. It is heavier than it looks and warmer than it weighs, and no one has ever slept badly beneath it. I would know. Complaints are the one thing guests are never too tired to deliver, and in all these years the geese have received none. Elias Wren stood in the doorway a moment, and took the room's measurements out of long habit. I watched the numbers happen behind his eyes. 12 foot by 10, seal at 30 inches. And then, and I remember this clearly, he let the numbers go. Set them down the way you set down a bag you have carried all day. Some rooms get measured. This one gets slept in. He put his boots by the door, side by side, heel to the wall, the left one first. He hung his coat on the peg and gave it one pat as if to say, "Well done, we made it." He laid tomorrow out on the chair in the order tomorrow would want it. The folded shirt, the wool socks, one inside the other, the small brass compass on top like a coin paying for the lot, so that the morning would ask nothing of him that the evening had not already answered. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and cleaned his pens. I had left him the candle and was pulling the door to, but the door is old and slow, and so I saw it, the little bottle of oil, the soft grey cloth, and the nibs wiped one at a time, each one held up to the candle and turned, inspected, approved, and laid in its tin like a soldier put to bed. 6 nibs, 6 small silver moments. There are men who say their prayers and men who clean their pens, and I have come to believe the 2 practices are more alike than either party would admit. Last of all he wound his watch. You could hear it in the quiet, that small ratcheting purr, around and around, the sound of tomorrow being gently persuaded to exist. Then the watch went on the nightstand, and the candle went out with a breath, and room 1 belonged to the dark and the rain, and the rain went on with its small work at the window. That is what it does on that glass, traveller. Small work, nothing grand. It gathers at the top of the pane, and comes down in threads, and the threads join and part and join again, smoothing the night down the glass over and over, the way a hand smooths a blanket that is already smooth, just for the pleasure of the smoothing. The fire downstairs settled into its ashes with a sigh of a job well done. The house creaked once at the third stair. Houses like to check, and then held its breath the way old houses do, all night, without any effort at all. And Elias Wren, with his boots at heel, and his nibs in their tin and 7 saved miles waiting for him in the morning, like a present with the string already loosened, pulled the geese up to his chin and slept. That same window is yours tonight. The rain has not changed its mind in all these years, and the geese are where they have always been, and the third stair will say good night when we go up. But not yet. There is more story, and the fire is not done with us. Let me tell you about the morning and the kitchen and the kind of breakfast a man eats before the best walk of his life. Chapter 4. Morning in the kitchen. He told me about that day so many times, over the nights that followed, each night a few more miles of it, that I can walk you through the whole of it now as though I had been in his boots. And the first part I saw with my own eyes anyway, because a kitchen does not light its own stove. I was down before 5. The windows were that deep, quiet blue that the sky keeps for the hour when nearly everyone is asleep, and the few who are not feel rather special about it. The storm had gone on in the night to bother some other county, and all that was left of it was the eaves, dripping in their slow, contented way, like a conversation winding down. I raked the stove and fed it kindling and listened to it think about the idea, and then accept it, which is the best sound a kitchen makes. The kettle went on, the porridge went on beside it, and I stood for a while doing what I do most mornings at that hour, which is nothing at all, on purpose, with my hands wrapped around the first warm thing of the day. Elias came down without a sound except the third stair, which announced him on principle. He was dressed for the road, in wool the colour of the hills he drew, and he looked rested in that particular way. A man looks when tomorrow has finally agreed to become today. He ate a proper breakfast, and he ate it slowly. Porridge with cream and a spoonful of honey, stirred in one direction only, I noticed, always one direction. 2 eggs. Bread toasted at the fire on the long fork with butter. And then, after a decent silence, more bread. Tea from the big brown pot, the pot that holds 4 cups and has never once been asked to prove it. He ate the way he did everything, giving the meal his whole attention, as though eggs were a landscape and he meant to be fair to them. And then, at the end of the table, in the lamplight, he packed the satchel. I have watched a great many people pack a great many bags at that table, traveller, and most of it is weather. Things thrown in, things dug out, things forgotten and remembered at the gate. This was not that. This was a small, quiet ceremony that had been performed some thousands of mornings, and it went like this. The notebook first, wrapped in oilcloth, laid flat against the back of the satchel where his shoulders would keep it dry, and it would keep his shoulders honest. Then the pencil roll, untied, counted, though he knew the count, and tied again. 12 pencils and the little knife that kept them sharp. The compass in its own small pocket where it lived alone, because instruments deserve quiet. Then the day's provisions, done up in paper, bread and cheese, an apple, turned once in his hand the way you check an apple you already trust. The flask filled from the big brown pot and stoppered tight. Each thing named under his breath. Each thing weighed in the hand for a moment, as if saying good morning to it. Each thing placed, not put. And when the strap was buckled, he set the whole satchel on the table and looked at it, and the satchel, I felt, looked back, and both parties found the arrangement satisfactory. One thing at a time, he said, and each thing done well, and the miles look after themselves. The sky through the windows had gone from slate to pearl. He put on his hat, which had dried into a shape it seemed happy with, and shouldered the satchel, and at the door he paused and looked back at the kitchen, at the stove muttering to itself, and the brown pot, and the lamp, and me. "I will be back by dark," he said, "or a little after. if the harbour is worth drawing, and it will be. Then he thanked me for the eggs, as though the hens had had nothing to do with it, and stepped out into the washed grey morning, and I stood in the doorway with my cup and watched him go down the path and through the gate, which he closed behind him softly, the way you close a door on a sleeping house. His boots left dark prints in the silver of the wet grass, and the prints went off in a line as straight as a made decision, and the eave stripped, and somewhere down the valley the first bird changed its mind about the dark. 7 miles were waiting for him, and they had been waiting 9 years, and neither party was in any hurry at all. Chapter 5. The First Miles. The path out of our valley climbs for a gentle half-mile, and then finds the top of the cliffs and stays there, as though it had been looking for the view all along. That was his road for the morning. The old coast path, worn to a ribbon of bare chalky earth by a few hundred years of feet that all agreed with each other about the best way to go. He walked, he told me, the way he always walked on a survey morning, which was slowly and in a straight line and counting, 80 paces to the first bend. He knew it would be 80 before he began, because a man who has walked 9 years of coastline carries the next mile in his legs before his legs have met it. 80 paces, and at the bend he stopped and stood very still and looked. That was the shape of the whole morning. Walk and stop and stand very still and look. Then the notebook out of the satchel and the pencil out of the roll, and a few lines made, unhurried, and a few numbers written beside them. Then the notebook away and on. Walk and stop and look and draw and walk on. There are worse shapes for a morning traveller. I am not sure on reflection that there are many better. The grass up there was still silver with the night's rain, and his boots turned it dark green as he went, so that anyone following could have read his whole route like a sentence written on the hillside. Nobody was following. That is one of the finer things about that path. The sea pinks were out along the cliff edge, little tough rosettes of them holding their flowers up into the salt air, nodding at nothing in particular. The gorse was in bloom the way gorse always is, because gorse does not believe in seasons, and it gave off its warm smell, which he said always reminded him of coconut and of every mile he had ever walked. Below him, a long way below and off his left shoulder all morning, was the sea. It was being calm that day, in the way the sea is calm after rain, glossy and slow and pleased with itself, the swell coming in against the base of the cliffs in no hurry whatsoever, folding over with a sound that reached him seconds late and softened, like applause heard from another room. The gulls rode the air below the cliff edge, hanging on the updraft with their wings set, adjusting a feather now and then, entirely unbothered by the man on the path or by anything else that had ever happened. Every so often he would sight backward, along the way he had come, to the church spire of our village, small and grey and steady behind him, and then forward, along the way he was going, to the white fleck at the far end of the morning that was the lighthouse on the point. Spire behind, light ahead, sea to the left, and the path unrolling itself in front of his boots like a modest little map of its own. A man knows where he is, he told me, when he can see one thing he has finished and one thing he has not. The sun came up out of the haze somewhere over the water, without ceremony the way it does when the sky is still washing itself, and the morning went from grey to grey gold, and he took off his coat and folded it over the satchel strap. He passed the old boundary stone that marks the far edge of the parish, leaning at the angle it has leaned at since before anyone now living was born, and he gave it a pat in passing, because it was, in a manner of speaking, a colleague, and all the while the pencil was doing its patient work, the way the cliff line eased out to make room for a buttress of rock, the little green landslip older than the path, where the land had once sat down to rest and never gotten up, the stream that came off the hill and flung itself over the edge in a thin white thread, which the fisherman called the mare's tail, and which he lettered into the notebook in his small even hand, glad of it, because a named thing is a kept thing. By the middle of the morning, the point had stopped being a white fleck and become a white tower, and the miles behind him had become lines and numbers riding safe and dry against his back. He stopped on a rise and ate a corner of the bread, standing up, looking at the whole soft length of the coast ahead of him. 3 miles walked, he said to himself, and said to me later, by way of the fire, 4 to go, and the best of them downhill. And he walked on at 3 miles an hour, at 80 paces to the bend, with the gulls hanging in the bright air below him, and the sea applauding softly from another room. Chapter 6. The Cove. A little past noon the path brought him to the top of the fisherman's stair. It is called a stair, he told me, out of courtesy. It is a set of steps cut into a seam of the cliff by men who were more interested in reaching their boats than in ceremony, each step worn in the middle to the shape of a shallow spoon by boots and time. It goes down the inside of a fold in the land, out of the wind, and it delivers you, 40 careful steps later, onto the shingle of a small cove that has no name on any map but his, where it is lettered in his small, even hand, the fisherman's stair. He went down with one hand on the cold stone the whole way, not because he doubted his feet, but because the stone was there and it seemed impolite not to. And at the bottom he stood on the shingle and let the cove introduce itself. It was a quiet little horseshoe of a place, a couple of 100 paces across, with the cliffs standing around it, like the walls of a room, and the sea coming in at the open door. The tide was low and going lower. The shingle sloped down in bands, big stones at the top, then smaller, then a strip of dark damp gravel, and then the waterline itself going quietly about its business. And the sound, traveller. He tried 3 times on 3 different nights to describe to me the sound of small waves on shingle, and in the end the best he did was this: the wave comes in with a hush and goes out with a purr, because it takes 1,000 little stones with it, and every stone rolls. Hush and purr, hush and purr. A cove full of pebbles is the most patient instrument in the world, he said, and the sea has been practicing on it forever, and has gotten very good. He made his way along to the rock pools at the southern arm, stepping from stone to stone with his arms out a little, the satchel swinging, looking, I've always imagined, exactly like a heron who had taken up a respectable profession. And there he crouched at the edge of the pools and paid a visit to each one in turn, because he was in no hurry, and because the tide would tell him when it wanted the pools back. The first pool had anemones in it, dark red ones, closed up like plums until the water stilled, and then opening, one slow arm at a time, into their soft anemone cells. The second had a crab, a green one about the size of a watch, which considered his shadow for a long moment and then moved 2 inches to the left with tremendous dignity, as though the idea had been its own. The third pool had kelp in it, amber and glossy, swaying all together with each breath of the sea outside, like slow flags, like the banners of a very relaxed kingdom. He looked into that one the longest. There is something in moving weed, he said, that lets the eyes off duty. Then he sat himself on a flat rock part way up the shingle, a rock still holding the morning's new sunshine, and he drew the cove, the glyphs first, and the stair, and the 2 arms of rock, and then the waterline, which is the joke the sea plays on cartographers, because it will not hold still. He told me his method, and I pass it to you as he passed it to me. You do not draw the wave, he said. You draw the wave's average. You watch the water come and go 10 times, 20, until your eye finds the line the sea keeps returning to, the line it means underneath all its fidgeting. And then you draw that. Most things have a line they mean, he said, underneath the fidgeting. People too. The trick is only to watch long enough. When the drawing was done, he had his lunch on that same warm stone. The bread and the cheese, unwrapped on his knee with the paper smoothed flat to serve as a table. The apple, eaten right around its equator in a tidy spiral, because of course it was. The flask of tea, still warm from the big brown pot which pleased him inordinately, 7 miles from its kitchen. And then, because the stone was warm and the cove was quiet, and the tide was still a long way out, he lay back with his hat over his face and did nothing at all for 10 minutes. He was very firm with me about this detail every time he told it. 10 minutes, hat over face, hands folded on his chest, the hush and purr of the shingle keeping the time. Not asleep, he insisted, resting his eyes, surveying the inside of his hat. Well, he was a careful man, and it was a careful nap, and I have promised to call it what he called it. Then he stood and brushed himself down, and climbed the 40-spoon steps back up to the path, one hand on the cold stone, the whole way out of politeness. Chapter 7. The Light at the Point. The lighthouse stands on the last knuckle of the headland, white as a fresh page, with a low white cottage beside it, and a wall around the two of them to keep the wind honest. Elias reached its gate in the middle of the afternoon, and the keeper was in the garden, lifting the last of her potatoes, and she straightened up and looked at him the way lighthouse keepers look at everything, which is, once, carefully and enough. Her name was Marin. She had kept that light for 30 years, and she spoke the way lighthouses speak. Seldom and worth it. You will be the mapman, she said. The fishermen have been saying you would come along the coast eventually, and here is the coast nearly finished, and here you are. Here I am, he agreed. Then you had better have tea, she said, in the tone of a woman stating a law of nature, and led him in. The kitchen of a lighthouse cottage is a round-shouldered, deep-walled, sensible room, and this one had walls 3 feet thick, so that the wind, which never entirely stops on that point, came through to them as nothing more than a low hum, like a choir warming up in another building. There was a stove, and a wall clock with a slow wooden tick, and a dresser with blue and white china stood up in ranks, and a table scrubbed pale as driftwood. She made tea strong enough to stand a spoon in, and set out bread and a heel of cheese and a pot of gooseberry jam without asking, because visitors to a lighthouse get fed, that also being a law of nature. And then, traveller, the two of them did a thing I would give a good deal to have watched. They compared notes. She fetched her logbook. 30 years of it, in a hand as small and even as his own, which pleased him the moment he saw it, one careful writer recognizing another, weather and tides and ships spoken to, and the slow habits of the sand at the river bar. He unrolled a working copy of his chart of the point, and weighted it with the jam pot and the cheese, and they bent over the table together, 2 grey heads and a wall clock ticking. She read her coast to him out loud, and he checked it against his lines. The ledge off the point that shows at half-tide, which the fishermen call the table. The set of the current in the last hour of the ebb, which pulls east, not west, whatever the almanac says. Twice she corrected him. There is a spring under the second cove, she said. Comes out of the cliff face, the sheep know it. And your rock there is 2 rocks. He took both corrections the way he took his soup, with complete attention and evident gratitude, and changed his lines then and there. And once he corrected her. Her chart of the sands was 3 winters old, and the channel had moved. He had seen it from the cliff that very morning. She looked at his sketch a long moment, and then wrote it into the logbook in her small even hand, and said, "Well then," and that was the whole of the argument, and all 3 corrections were received on both sides the way careful people receive them, which is as gifts. They took a second pot of tea for pleasure rather than thirst, and she showed him the lamp room up the spiral stair, all brass and glass and patience, every surface polished into weather. The great lens sat waiting for evening the way the kettle waits for morning. Nothing in that room had ever been put down carelessly. He said afterward it was the tidiest room he had ever stood in, and that he had thought of my kitchen, which I have chosen to take kindly. Before he left, he asked her the question he had asked all down 9 years of coast. What do you call this place that the chart should call it too? She thought about it, wiping her hands on her apron, looking out the little deep window at the sea. The board calls it the point light, she said. The fishermen call it Maren's light, but they would hardly say so to me. Then that is its name, he said. And on the working chart, at the tip of the last knuckle of the headland, he lettered it in his small, even hand, while she pretended very hard to be tidying the dresser. Maren's light. It is on the map in my hallway to this day, traveller, and she never did say anything about it, and he never expected her to, and I am told the jam pot left a faint ring on the corner of the sea, which he kept, because a chart that has been to tea should be allowed to show it. She walked him to the gate. The afternoon was going long and gold behind the tower. 4 miles walked, said the path. 3 to go, said the shadows, and the best of them downhill. Mind the wall when the path turns inland, she said, by way of goodbye. Trust the wall. It was built by men who knew where the water comes to. He touched his hat and went, and behind him the light stood white and patient on its point, thinking about the evening. Chapter 8. The Salt Meadows. Past the lighthouse, the coast changes its mind. The cliffs step down and give way to dunes, and the path leaves the sea's edge for a while and goes inland, behind the sand hills, through the Salt Meadows. And through the Salt Meadows, just as Maren had said, goes the wall. It is an old dry stone wall, hip high, grey and lichened and easy in itself, and it has wandered across those meadows for longer than anyone can tell you. It does not go straight because the men who built it were not drawing a line. They were answering the ground, a rise here, a soft place there, and the wall remembers every one of their decisions. Trust the wall, she had told him. It was built by men who knew where the water comes to. And so, where the path grew vague among the grasses as paths do in meadows, he put his hand on the top stones and let the wall do the navigating. The light by then had gone long and honey-coloured, the way it does in the last hours of a fine afternoon, when the sun stops being overhead and becomes a companion, walking along beside you at the height of the hedges. Every stone of the wall had its own small shadow. Every tussock of grass was lit up along one side like a little green lamp. The rushes stood in their soft battalions where the ground grew wet, and when the breeze came through them they hissed gently all together, the sound of 1,000 very small brooms sweeping a floor that was already clean. The meadows had sheep in them, of course. They lifted their heads as he came along the wall and regarded him with the ancient skepticism of sheep, chewing all the while, entirely unconvinced by him, as they have been unconvinced by everything since the beginning of the world. He bid them good afternoon. They declined to comment and put their heads back down, and the sound of their cropping went on all around him, that small steady tearing, one of the oldest quiet sounds there is. He counted the stiles as he went, because it was in his nature, and because stiles belong on a map of a coast path more than almost anything, a walker being a creature who wishes above all to know how many climbs stand between himself and his supper. There were 5, each one a couple of flat stones let through the wall, worn smooth as the fisherman's stare, and he went over each with the same tidy economy, hand, boot, down, and a pat for the top stone, the way he had patted the boundary stone that morning. Colleagues, all of them. And he drew the wall. That was the work of the meadows, and he did it the way he did everything. He would walk a stretch and stop, and look back along the grey wandering line of it, and set down its wander in the notebook, curve for curve. A wall like that, he told me, is the truest thing on a map. Cliffs crumble and channels shift, and even lighthouses are painted new colours by committees, but a good wall goes on answering the ground long after everyone has forgotten the question. Somewhere in the middle of the meadows he found the hare's path. a narrow parting in the grass no wider than your two hands, coming from nowhere in particular under the wall and going somewhere particular through the rushes, pressed smooth by feet that weigh nothing and travel by night. He stood and considered it for a while. It would appear on no chart in the world, and no committee would ever name it. He drew it in any way, one faint pencil line, unlabeled. Every map, he said to me, can afford one secret, something for the mapmaker, between himself and the ground. The air out there smelled of salt and warm grass, and the faint dark sweetness of the wet places, and the sea, out of sight beyond the dunes, kept up its low white noise, further off now like a conversation in the next room that you are glad is happening and glad not to be in. A curlew called somewhere over the sand hills, that long, soft, bubbling call that sounds the way the last of the afternoon feels, and was answered once from a long way off. 5 stiles, 1 secret, and 1.5 miles of honest wall. At the far side, the wall handed him over to a lane, and the lane pointed itself down the last long slope of the day, and below him, where the river met the sea, the roofs of Saltmere were beginning to gather smoke. Chapter 9. Saltmere at dusk. He came down the last hill slowly, and not because he was tired. He told me more than once that the walker's proper reward for a long day is to arrive at dusk, downhill, with the lamps coming on below him, and he had saved these 7 miles for 9 years, partly, I believe, for the sake of that one descent. The lane dropped between hedges, and the roofs of the village came up to meet him, 1 row at a time, grey slate going lavender in the late light, and the windows were coming alive as he watched. 1 here, 2 there, a whole terrace by the harbour, lighting up in no order at all, the way stars come out, each lamp a small decision, made by somebody's hand, until the village lay below him, wearing all its little fires. The smell of the place rose up the hill to meet him too. Wood smoke first, and under it the tide smell, mud and salt and weed, and under that, faintly, frying fish, because it was supper time in Saltmere, and Saltmere has always known exactly what to do about supper time. The tide was low in the harbour. The boats had settled onto the mud in that comfortable sideways way that boats have at low water, leaning together in 2s and 3s like old friends outside a church, keels sunk in their own soft reflections. He walked out along the sea wall reading their names in the last light, because boat names were another thing he collected all down that coast, and these were the last of them. The Kindregard, the 2 sisters, the Patience, which he thought a very good name for a boat, and I think a better one for this story. Nets were hung along the rails to dry, still beaded with the day, and the gulls stood about on the posts in their evening congregations, discussing matters of importance to gulls. At the end of the sea-wall there is a worn stone bench, set where the wall elbows out over the harbour mouth, and there he sat himself down, with the satchel beside him, and took out the notebook, and drew the last drawing of his last survey. The harbour's curve, the 2 arms of the wall, and the leaning boats, and the huddle of roofs behind, and the river coming down to the sea through its shining channel in the mud. He drew while the sky went from apricot to rose, and from rose to violet, and he told me that he slowed his pencil on purpose over that page, the way you slow your steps at the end of a walk you have loved. And the sky and the drawing worked their way down together, the light going out of the one as the lines went into the other, until, at the bottom of the page, in the last of the useful dusk, he set down the final sounding and lettered the harbour's name, and there was nothing left in front of him to draw. He closed the notebook with both hands, flat together, the way some men close a prayer book. 7 miles walked, 9 years gathered, all of it riding in the satchel now, in pencil, safe against his back, wanting only ink and a long table. He sat on for a little while all the same, because the evening was worth sitting in. The water made its small harbour sounds against the wall below him. The rigging of the leaning boats ticked and tapped in the last of the breeze, halyard or mast, gentle and irregular, the sound of boats sleeping. Somewhere back in the lanes a door opened and let out a moment of voices and firelight and closed again, kindly on both. A dog trotted out along the sea wall on business of its own, greeted him with one sniff and a wag, as brief as a nod, and trotted back satisfied. The first star came out over the water and was immediately outnumbered by the village. "The map is warped," he said to the harbour, quietly, by way of a toast, and the tide, which had turned somewhere in the last hour without telling anyone, began to come back in. Chapter 10. The Carrier's Cart. Now a man who has walked 7 miles and finished a life's field work may be forgiven for not walking 7 miles home in the dark, and he had no intention of it. The carrier goes back up our valley from Saltmere 3 evenings a week, and this was one of the evenings, and that is not luck, traveller. Elias Wren had chosen his day the way he sharpened his pencils, carefully and some time in advance. The carrier in those days was a Mr. Dunn, a large, calm man who moved parcels and persons up and down the coast road behind a large, calm horse called Bonnie, and the two of them had agreed on a pace many years before and saw no cause to revisit the question. Elias found the cart loading by the harbour steps and asked for the inn at the crossroads, and Mr. Dunn looked at him and at his satchel and said, "Room on the bench, mind the butter box," in the tone of a man for whom that sentence was an entire evening's conversation. And so the last miles of the day went by at Bonnie's pace, which is to say at the pace of the world before anyone was in a hurry. The cart had a lantern on a bracket by the driver's seat, and the lantern swung gently, with the carts rolling, and its light swung with it, a little room of warm light that travelled along the dark lanes with them, sliding over the hedges, finding the pale trunks of trees and letting them go, stretching ahead on the ruts and gathering itself back. Outside that little room the night was soft and enormous and smelled of cooling grass. Inside it there was the bench and the butter box and the broad, patient back of Bonnie walking home. The sounds of that ride, he said, were the best lullaby he ever heard, and he heard it fighting sleep the whole way, which is the correct way to hear a lullaby. The hooves in their slow 4-beat time, clop and clop and clop and clop, never faster, never slower, a clock that told no hour but homeward, a cart itself creaking in its joints, each rut answered by the same small wooden remark, the lantern's bracket giving one soft squeak at the top of every swing, regular as breathing, and under it all the wheels turning through the dark with that long, low, grinding whisper that wheels make on a chalk road, the sound of distance being quietly used up. Mr. Dunn spoke twice in the first 3 miles. He said rain's gone through and some while later be a clear night now. Elias agreed with both remarks at a respectful interval, and the conversation was in this manner brought to a satisfactory conclusion by all parties, including, one felt, the horse. And Elias sat with the leather tube across his knees, both hands resting on it, and let the day settle into him. That is his phrase, and I have kept it. The day settling into a man, he said, the way the cart settles into its ruts, the miles going down into the legs, the drawings going down into the satchel's dark, the whole long coast going quiet in him, mile by mile, until it lay as still inside him as it would soon lie on the paper. His head nodded and woke and nodded. The lantern swung. An owl went over the lane once, white and silent as a thought, and was gone before it could be called anything. And then the hedges opened, and there across the dark field were the windows of this inn, traveller, amber and low and waiting. 2 downstairs and 1 up, which was his, because I had lit the candle in room 1 at dusk, it being plain what sort of day he was having and what sort of welcome it deserved. "No hurry at all," said Bonnie's feet on the last of the road. "No hurry at all. No hurry at all." And the cart came up out of the dark to the gate and stopped, and the night was full of the smell of my kitchen, which I will admit I had arranged on purpose. Chapter 11. The Last Line. He came in with the cold of the evening on his coat and the whole coast in his satchel, and I did what any sensible innkeeper does with a man in that condition. I sat him down and fed him before he could say one word about maps. Mutton stew it was, with dumplings, and he ate it by the fire with his boots steaming gently on the hearthstone, and he told me about the stair and the pools and marren and the wall and the boats leaning together in the mud like old friends. And when the bowl was empty and had been wiped respectfully with the last of the bread, he looked over at the long table by the window, and I looked at him looking, and I said, "I wiped it twice while you were at your supper. Go on." "Lines are drawn better on soup," he said, which I believe was his way of saying thank you, and he went to the table and opened a leather tube. The map came out with its long, slow-breathing sound and lay down the table in the lamplight, 9 years of it, and the blank 7 miles waiting in the lower corner like the last empty chair at a supper. He weighted the corners, the salt cellar, the smooth grey stone, the inkwell, and the pocket watch ticking quietly on the corner of the sea, as before, as always. Then he propped the day's notebook open on a stand he made of 2 candlesticks, and he mixed his ink. I did not know before that night that ink was mixed fresh by such men, but it is, or was by him. The little cake of it, black as a moonless hour, and a few drops of water in a white dish, and the cake worked in slow circles until the dish held a small dark pool exactly to his liking. The smell of it came across the room, faint and sharp and old-fashioned, a smell like school and church and important letters. He chose a nib from the tin, the third of the 6, held it to the lamp, approved it, and fitted it to the pen. And then, traveller, for the best part of 3 hours the inn held one of the finest silences I have ever kept. There was the fire, settling. There was the rain, which came back around midnight as soft as an apology, and took up its old small work on the glass, so that the story ends in the weather it began in, which I have always taken as a courtesy on the weather's part. There was the watch, ticking on the corner of the sea, and over all of it, steady as the tide, there was the nib. A drawing nib on good paper makes a sound like nothing else. A small, dry, whispering scratch, in little strokes and long, patient runs, the sound of a very quiet person saying a true thing over and over. I polished glasses that did not need polishing at the far end of the bar for 3 hours to have a reason to stay in the room with it. Under his hand, the blank corner filled. The point came first, and the small tower of Maren's light upon it. Then the long run of cliff with the mare's tail falling. The fisherman's stair and the little horseshoe cove, the dunes, and behind them the wall, laid down curve for honest curve with its 5 stiles. One faint line went through the rushes that he labelled not at all, and smiled over privately, and I did not ask. Then the last hill and the roofs, and the 2 arms of the harbour holding its leaning boats, and the river's channel shining through the mud in fine pale strokes. The combed hills grew up around it all. Thousands of small strokes laid the way wind lays the grass. And last of all the names lettered small and even under the lamp. The mare's tail, the fisherman's stair, Maren's light, Saltmere. Somewhere near midnight the pen came down the last inch of river, met the sea, and stopped. He sat back. He laid the pen in its rest. And for a while he said nothing at all, and neither did I, and neither did the house, which held its breath the way old houses do. 9 years. And it was one thing now. One coast, whole, asleep on a table, from the first headland to the last lamp of Saltmere, and the ink of the final mile still catching the light, wet as the sea it described. I brought 2 small glasses of something warm from the back of a high shelf, where I keep it for occasions the calendar does not know about. We drank standing at the table, without a word of a toast for a moment, because the right words take a moment. Then he raised his glass an inch and said, "To the coast," which has held still at last. "To the coast," I said, and the rain went on with its small work, and the watch ticked on the corner of the sea, and the fire put itself to bed in its ashes, and the map lay in the lamplight. Done. Chapter 12. Turning down the lamp. He stayed on 9 more nights after that, did Elias Wren, making his fair copy by the window in the good morning light, at no particular speed, like a man copying out a favourite poem. And when at last he rolled it all away and paid his bill and stood in the doorway with the sun on him, he looked, I will say, extremely well slept. Some months later, a parcel came, done up in oilcloth and string, and in the parcel was a copy of the map, the whole coast of it, and a short letter in a small even hand that said only, "For the wall by the stairs, if it will have me." It would, and it did, and it hangs there to this day, traveller, just at the turn of the stair, where the lamplight reaches it. You will pass it on your way up. On quiet nights I stand there and walk the whole coast with one finger, spire to light to harbour, 7 saved miles and all, and it takes about a minute, and it is 9 years long. But look at me, talking while the fire goes low. Come, bring your cup. Just leave it on the tray, that's it. The washing up is tomorrow's problem. And tomorrow is a long way from here yet. Out past the rain somewhere. In no hurry, like everything worth waiting for. The stairs are just this way. Mind the third one. It creaks, but I have long thought that is only the house saying good night, and it means it kindly. There is the map, do you see? There in the shadow at the turn. The little tower on the point is Maren's light. The last lamp at the bottom is Saltmere, and that long grey wonder behind the dunes is the wall, still answering the ground. And here we are, room 1. The bed is turned down, and the geese are waiting, all their small blue wings pointed home. The rain has kept your window for you, and it is making that round sound on the glass, the one I told you of, the one it makes nowhere else. There is water in the jug and a candle on the stand, and if you find you want anything in the night, my best advice is to want it slowly, and by morning it will generally have wanted itself. I'll turn the lamp down low now. The rain can mind the inn until morning. It has done so before, and it knows the work, the small work on the glass, over and over, smoothing the night down. Everything that needed doing today is done, and everything else was never yours to do. The map is drawn. The boots are by the door. The fire will see itself out, and the house will hold its breath, and the geese will keep their slow, quiet way south across the quilt all night without moving at all. One thing at a time, traveller, and each thing done well. And the last thing, the very last thing, is this. Close your eyes, sleep well. Your room will always be waiting,